The morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Harrison Enterprises' executive floor as I reviewed the documents one final time. Everything had to be perfect for today's board meeting. After 18 months of careful investigation and documentation, I was finally ready to expose the carefully orchestrated campaign of sabotage that my mother-in-law, Diana Harrison, had been waging against her own stepdaughter. From my office, I could see Diana's Mercedes pulling into her reserved parking space 48 floors below. Even from this distance, her arrival was a study in carefully cultivated power. The precisely timed exit from her car, the practiced stride that made her Louboutin heels look effortless, the slight nod to security that reminded everyone she was Mrs. Harrison, wife of the CEO and self-appointed guardian of the family legacy. At 58, Diana had perfected the art of commanding attention. Her designer suits and perfectly styled silver hair projected the image of corporate royalty she'd cultivated since marrying into the Harrison family 30 years ago. She'd spent those decades building her influence, transforming herself from a junior PR executive who'd caught the recently widowed CEO's eye into the power behind the Harrison throne. I gathered my files, thinking about how different things had been when I first joined Harrison Enterprises 10 years ago. Fresh from my MBA at Northwestern, I'd been eager to prove myself as more than just James Harrison's new wife. Diana had seemed supportive at first, taking me under her wing, showing me the ropes of corporate leadership. I'd been too naive then to recognize the subtle tests, the careful assessment of whether I would be a useful ally or a potential threat. My phone buzzed. A message from Rachel Harrison, my sister-in-law and Diana's latest target. Just landed at O'Hare. Kevin's driving me straight to the office. Everything ready? All set, I replied, thinking of the evidence assembled in my briefcase. Diana has no idea you're back in Chicago. Rachel's response came quickly. Good. After what she did to the Singapore deal, I want to see her face when everything comes out. The Singapore deal had been the final straw. A billion-dollar technology partnership that Rachel had spent 2 years developing, only to have it mysteriously fall apart at the last minute. What Diana didn't know was that the Singapore executives had contacted Rachel directly, confused about why Mrs. Harrison had warned them about ongoing patent disputes that didn't actually exist. That had been Diana's mistake. She'd grown too confident, too careless in her manipulation. After 20 years of watching her methodically eliminate anyone she saw as a threat to her control of Harrison Enterprises, she'd finally overplayed her hand. A knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. James, my husband and Diana's stepson, stood there looking concerned. You're sure about this? I studied him carefully. At 42, James had inherited his father's height and presence, but years under Diana's influence had taught him to second-guess himself. Do you trust me? Always. He stepped into the office, closing the door. But this is going to devastate Dad, finding out what Diana's been doing. He needs to know the truth, I said gently. Your father built this company on innovation and integrity. Diana's been systematically destroying both. James ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture I'd come to recognize as a sign of internal conflict. I just keep thinking about what happened to Tom Chen. Tom Chen had been Harrison Enterprises' previous chief innovation officer, the position Rachel now held. He'd resigned abruptly 5 years ago after a series of unfortunate mishaps had damaged his reputation within the company. I'd suspected Diana's involvement then but hadn't had proof. Now I did. Emails showing how she'd orchestrated his downfall because he questioned her influence over company strategy. That's exactly why we have to stop her, I replied. Tom Chen, Maria Rodriguez, David Klein, they're all brilliant executives who could have helped this company grow. Diana drove them out because they wouldn't play by her rules. Now she's targeting Rachel for the same reason. Because she's living proof that Dad had a life before Diana, James finished quietly. I nodded. Rachel was Robert Harrison's daughter from his first marriage, born 2 years before his wife Sarah died of cancer. Diana had married Robert when Rachel was 8, positioning herself as the perfect stepmother while systematically working to minimize Rachel's connection to the Harrison legacy. My phone buzzed again. A message from my assistant. Board members arriving. Meeting in 30 minutes. I gathered my files and stood. Ready? James squared his shoulders, looking more like the executive he was meant to be. Let's do this. The Harrison Enterprises boardroom occupied the entire northeast corner of the 48th floor, its wraparound windows offering panoramic views of downtown Chicago. By the time James and I arrived, most of the board members had taken their usual seats around the massive oak table. Robert Harrison sat at the head, reviewing documents with his characteristic focus. Diana swept in moments later, her entrance perfectly timed as always. "Catherine, darling," she greeted me with practiced warmth. "I didn't expect to see you here today. I thought you were overseeing the Chicago merger." "The paperwork's complete," I replied smoothly. "Wouldn't miss this meeting for the world." Diana's smile flickered almost imperceptibly. She'd spent months engineering my absence from this crucial vote, creating endless tasks that should have kept me thoroughly occupied. What she didn't know was that I'd finished them all weeks ago, working through nights and weekends for this moment. As she took her seat, I noticed the slight tremor in her hand as she arranged her papers, the first sign that today's board meeting wouldn't go as she planned. Diana had always prided herself on perfect self-control, but I'd learned to read the subtle tells that betrayed her tension. "Shall we begin?" Her voice carried just the right note of authority. "We have several crucial matters to discuss, particularly regarding the restructuring of our executive team." I knew exactly what that meant. For the past year, Diana had been systematically working to push Rachel out of her position as Chief Innovation Officer. It didn't matter that Rachel had revolutionized our tech division, securing patents that had doubled company profits. In Diana's eyes, Rachel's real crime was being a constant reminder that she wasn't Robert's first love. Before we moved to that agenda item, I interrupted. "I have some information the board should review." Diana's perfectly manicured fingers tightened around her pen. "I don't recall adding any items to today's agenda." This couldn't wait. I began distributing folders to each board member. These documents detail a pattern of systematic harassment and corporate sabotage directed at Rachel Harrison over the past 18 months. The room fell silent as board members opened their folders. I watched Diana's face as she scanned the contents, noting the exact moment she realized what she was seeing. "Every emergency that called Rachel away from crucial meetings," I continued. "Every project deliberately underfunded. Every client mysteriously advised to avoid her division. All traced back to your office, Diana." "This is ridiculous," she snapped, but her voice lacked its usual authority. "I've only ever acted in the company's best interests." "Really?" I pulled out another set of documents. "Then perhaps you can explain these emails. The ones showing how you've been actively working to discredit Rachel's patents, trying to transfer them to shell companies under your control." Robert Harrison's voice cut through the tension. "Is this true, Diana?" I saw the calculation in her eyes as she turned to her husband. "Robert, surely you can't believe these accusations. I'm being set up." "By whom?" The new voice came from the doorway. Rachel stood there, looking every inch her father's daughter in a suit that matched the Harrison corporate colors. "Your own emails, the witnesses who've signed affidavits, the paper trail of your attempts to steal my patents." Diana's composure cracked. "You have no right. This is my company now." "Actually," I corrected her, "it's still very much a Harrison family company, and you've just shown everyone exactly why you can't be trusted with its future." The next 2 hours unfolded like a carefully orchestrated symphony of corporate justice. Our legal team, led by Marcus Chen from our outside counsel, methodically presented evidence that left no room for doubt. Email trails showed Diana's systematic campaign to undermine Rachel's division. Financial records revealed suspicious patterns of project defunding that always seemed to target Rachel's most promising innovations. "The patent transfer attempts are particularly concerning," Marcus explained to the board, displaying a series of documents on the boardroom's screens. "Mrs. Harrison attempted to exploit a loophole in our IP registration process to redirect ownership of key technologies to shell companies under her indirect control." I watched Robert's face as each new piece of evidence was presented. The man who had built Harrison Enterprises from a modest tech startup into a Fortune 500 company seemed to age years in those few hours. Yet there was also a growing resolution in his expression, a determination I recognized from our most challenging business negotiations. Diana's attempts at defense grew increasingly desperate. Everything I did was to protect this company, she insisted, her perfect composure cracking further with each new revelation. Rachel's inexperience could have cost us everything. I was safeguarding our legacy. By stealing my patents? Rachel's voice cut through Diana's protestations. By sabotaging partnerships I spent years developing? That's not protection, Diana. That's theft. The board's vote was unanimous. Diana was removed from her position as Chief Strategy Officer, her access to company systems immediately revoked. As security waited to escort her from the building, she turned to Robert one last time. 30 years, she said, her voice trembling. I gave this company 30 years of my life. No, Robert replied quietly. You spent 30 years trying to take control of something that was never yours to own. There's a difference.